So I've got a few questions that came in that are around the theme of what it means to lead now. By the way, I should have told everybody that Simon did not want to see these questions in advance. So this is real time. So bunch on what it means to lead right now and into the future. So, but the first one someone wanted to ask is, you're a leadership expert, but you're also a human being going through this pandemic as well. So how are you doing? And how are you living and leading through this moment?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my experiences in terms of emotional ups and downs is like everybody's. When COVID first started, like many businesses, our business lost its primary source of income. We made most of our income from live events and live workshops, and of course those disappeared almost immediately. And so we had to completely reorganize and change the business we were in. I needed to stay focused, even though there was all of this uncertainty and craziness. You know, we were cleaning our groceries every day. So I called a friend of mine who is active duty military. And I asked him a simple question. I said, when you go to combat, how do you compartmentalize your emotions so that you can stay mission focused? Because that's what I need to do. And he gave me a stern warning. He said, we can't. He said, we can compartmentalize our emotions only for a short period of time. He said, but nobody escapes the trauma of combat. And so I sort of called all my A-type personality friends and said, listen, we're all going to go through this. And so let's just all agree to call each other if we start to feel off our game. Sure enough, 4 or 5 months into COVID, I started to feel completely off my game. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I remember struggling to focus. I didn't know what it was. So I called that same friend and I said, what are your symptoms? And he said, well, number one, he falls out of his sleep pattern. He starts going to bed really late and doesn't want to get out of bed in the morning. And I thought to myself, yep. And then he says he'll have an unproductive day and he'll rationalize it to himself. Oh, you've been working really hard. It's okay to have a slow day. But then he has another and another. And I thought to myself, yep. And then he said, and he becomes antisocial. He doesn't want to talk to anyone and he definitely doesn't want to ask anyone for help. And I thought to myself, yep. And that's when I realized I was going through the trauma of COVID. And I didn't want to use that word depression because it sounded like a diagnosis, but that's basically what it was. It was little d depression. So I asked him, what do you do to combat it? And he said, well, number one, he forces himself back into a sleep pattern. Number two, he lets people know on his team, listen, I'm going through something. I'm not going to be that reliable. Please just help me out here, you know. And number three, he forces himself to reach out to people and ask for help. And so that's what I did. I forced myself to call people and basically tell people exactly how I was feeling and ask for help. One of the people I happened to call is a remarkable executive coach named Andrea Garfield, and I hit record on my computer and then eventually posted it on YouTube with the hope that it might help someone else, the advice that she gave me. But I can tell you that everyone goes through it. Nobody goes through it the same way. Everybody goes through it at different times. And the number one thing that helped me get through it reasonably healthily and reasonably quickly in comparison was the fact that I reached out to people and there were so many people there to help me.
It's such a good reminder that no matter who you are, that concept of just being vulnerable and letting people know you need help, how powerful that can be in terms of helping us get through that. So it's nice that you've shared that with us. And I love the concept of compartmentalizing, that we all think we have to compartmentalize and control our emotions. So I love that. Let go of the compartmentalization. Yeah. It's not a task that you can actually master. That's great.
It's also really important for leaders to recognize that they lead by example. And a lot of leaders make the false mistake that they have to pretend to be strong and in control all the time, even though they may be struggling and suffering on the inside, because it actually backfires. Because if your team is struggling, especially through something as extreme as what we've gone through the past 18 months, that when our team who's struggling sees us, you know, strong and all the answers and optimistic and confident all the time, they start to think it's them. That if my leader is managing this, then there's something wrong with me. And so it's actually very important from a leadership standpoint for those leaders to express, I'm going through something, or I need to talk to somebody, or I'm asking for help, or I'm off my game, because it actually allows everybody else to be expressive and ask their leaders for help when they're going through something.
So powerful, so powerful. I totally agree. We've been doing a lot of work over the last couple of years on focus and focusing on what matters most. what have you been doing to help you stay very focused, notwithstanding some of those other things you've been working on? But are there a couple techniques you do to just make sure you stay focused on what matters most?
Well, having a vision is really important. I mean, you can't go on a trip and not know where you're driving, and I think, unfortunately, that's how a lot of businesses run. They run visionless, which doesn't mean they don't have goals, but that's like saying, I'm going on a trip, I'm getting in the car, and we're going to drive 100 miles a day. That's our goal. And it's like a business. We set we set financial goals, and we keep looking at the speedometer and seeing if we're on pace to hit the financial goal and hit how much mileage we want to cover over the course of that day. But the question is where are you going? And so you hit all your goals, and you hit all your mileage, and you hit all your speeds, and you hit all your financial targets, but to what end? And so one of the things that helps me stay focused is a constant reminder, both to myself and to the team, of why we're doing this in the first place. Because then we may see opportunities that may be lucrative in the short term, but they'll take us off path. It's mission creep that'll eventually, over time, start to waste resources. And so sometimes it's the discipline of staying focused on something that we have to get done, and not get too distracted by even shiny objects on the sides. So a clear sense of purpose and a clear sense of just cause has helped me immeasurably.
That's terrific, and I think we're going to start using that mission creep. I like that. We do scope creep, but I love that concept of mission creep. We really try as well to keep focused on our North Star to try to anchor us, but it is tough. We do get distracted, and it's a tough but very important discipline. So Suzanne is someone is going to join us for a question, and I'm going to throw over the question to Suzanne Truesdale.
Hi, thanks, Sandy. Simon, lovely to meet you. Thanks so much for joining us today. I lead our Small Business Solutions sales team, and in my role, I lead a large number of people leaders. And just wondering what advice you would give all of us, as we think about how we best support our leaders to make sure our leaders are set up really well to lead effectively during these challenging times, and to really be able to support the team members that they have the privilege to lead every day.
It's one of those questions about what is the core of leadership. And I remember when COVID started, a lot of people leaned back on their humanity, whether they were effective or ineffective leaders prior to COVID. Many people picked up the phone, called the people in their charge, and said, "Are you okay? How are you doing? Just checking in on you." Well, that's just called good leadership. And so I think empathy is one of the things that I would recommend. One, that you have empathy for those leaders. You check in on them. I think the phone is a wonderful thing. Even though you may have an open door policy, remember, you're assuming that people have the courage to walk in. So to checking in on people, I think, is a big deal. And like I said, using the telephone, but then also giving them the skills to do the same. It's very hard to do that sometimes. I think in businesses can do a lot better job of teaching our people, especially people in leadership positions, human skills. I hate the term soft skills, because hard and soft are opposites, and not to mention soft sounds mushy and gross, right? The reality is what we need to do our jobs and what we need to train our people to do their jobs are hard skills. These are the physical things they need to do to be effective at their work that we've asked them to do, and human skills, which are things like listening, things like empathy, things like effective confrontation, how to give and receive feedback, how to things like that. And we don't teach those. We can do a much better job at teaching those. And if someone has the hard skills and the human skills, it makes them a much better leader. So one is us leading by example, checking in on people, exemplifying that empathy, but also teaching them the skills that we want them to pass down the same way, especially if they're responsible for small businesses. I mean, small businesses have gone through an unbelievable stress that few of us can even relate to. And simply to just call up and say, "How are you?" Not offer a solution, not sell something, but to just give an ear. That's called building trust. So then when it does come to actually having a solution, and when somebody wants something, they're more likely to trust you than somebody else, simply because you treated them like a human being in a time of difficulty.
Thanks so much for that, Suzanne. And just as a follow-up to that, Simon, because I think it's an excellent point around just the empathy and calling up people and asking, "How are you?" and just being human. Why do you think it's hard for many leaders to just show that other side of being human? And You mentioned we don't train those skills. A lot of them are innate, but they can all be developed. What gets in our way of fully developing those attributes?
Well, I think some people turn off the humanity when they go to work. They may be, loving parents and loving friends and loving, children to their own parents. And yet for some reason, there's a switch that they think that that's irresponsible to do at work. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily wearing your heart on your sleeve every day. There is something called emotional professionalism. If you're having a bad day, you can say, listen, I'm a little off my game today, but you can't sit in a meeting with your arms folded and be grumpy and give one-word answers. That's emotionally unprofessional. You can have hard feelings, but you can't go around screaming and yelling at people. You can have, so I think there is emotional professionalism. But I think for some reason, especially as people make their way up the ranks, they think that expressing any kind of emotion is a sign of weakness. Even that word vulnerability, we talk, it's such a common word now being talked about in the business world that you have to be vulnerable. To this day, it makes some people feel very uncomfortable. I don't want to be vulnerable. Well, all vulnerability means is saying things like, I don't know, or I need help, or I'm overwhelmed, or can you help me do this because I don't know how to do this, or I've been promoted to a position where maybe I need more training. And the reason we're afraid of saying that is for fear that it makes us look weak, which will then damage our careers. The reality is the total opposite. By saying I don't know means someone can help us. But instead we choose to lie, hide, and fake very often, which eventually gets revealed. Enough stress piled on that lying, hiding, and faking collapses either professionally or personally. We either feel the stress or the projects that we're working on start to go haywire. And very often when we get to those points, everybody knows anyway. The amazing thing that I've learned is when you say, can somebody help me? We're surrounded by people who would love to help us. They just didn't think we needed it because we acted as if we didn't. So I think a large part of it is quite frankly fear. Fear that if I express these things, that people will think I'm not qualified for my job, where the opposite is true. And remember, when you are in a position of leadership, you don't actually have to be better at doing the job that the people you lead. You have to be responsible for taking care of them to make sure they're good at their job. But for some reason, we think that I have to be better than you at your own job because I'm the leader. Completely false. I just have to make sure that you're equipped, you have the tools, the training, and the psychological safety to be the best you can be, even if it's better than me.
Incredible. And there's, as someone once said to me, there's freedom on the other side of that fear. So if we can get past the fear, there's freedom to be authentic. And as you often say, to do your best work. So I really love that. Shazia has another question, and has a question for us, and she's going to appear momentarily. Shazia, over to you.
Thanks, Sandy. Hi, Simon. Thanks for being here with us. I lead the team that supports our award-winning broadband networks, and I'm really interested knowing your views that what would an effective leadership look like in post-pandemic world?
So I think post-pandemic leadership looks exactly the same as good leadership pre-pandemic, which is it's acknowledging the awesome responsibility to see those around us rise. One of the things we have to acknowledge is that things have changed. I actually think there's a lot of good that's come out of the pandemic in terms of leadership. One, as I said before, that we relied on our humanity. For those who did or didn't do it prior to the pandemic, I hope you continue to do it afterwards. That's just good leadership. But also we got to see people in their own environments, right? We got to see people in their homes. We got to see their kids and their pets run in and interrupt. We became a little more patient. We were okay with things not being perfect. It was kind of remarkable how meetings would get disrupted and nobody really got bothered. Prior to the pandemic, we would have got annoyed by that. Also, we didn't even know that you had kids, So just to discover that people have families and they have lives outside of work, I think helps us see our colleagues as human beings with other stresses and other strains and other things going on in their lives. I hope that all remains. So post-pandemic, I hope we continue to ask people, how are your kids? Do you have kids? You know, when there's a new hire, do you have a family? Usually we just get straight to work and we avoid those things. So I think seeing people as a human being and having other lives, finding out what their hobbies and dreams are, I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing. The other thing is, I think, as I said before, we got a little more patient. Like, we understood people had stresses at home with kids at home, learning from home. And we said, listen, if you need to miss this meeting, we'll fill in for you. We'll fill in the gaps. Don't worry. Go do that. Well, I hope those things remain, that we start to recognize that part of the work-life imbalance that so many people struggle with is actually not the problem of the people who are trying to find the work-life balance, but it's us who don't recognize that people have other things in their lives. We see them only as employees. So yeah, I hope some of those things that we've learned during the pandemic remain.
Thanks, Shaz. Yeah, we hope so too. We've been really trying to emphasize leading with compassion. And I think we all want to see a world where we're leading with more compassion as a permanent change. I want to double click on something you said earlier. We've been talking about this as well. The no such thing as soft skills. I want to come back to that, and I think we all agree we want to say goodbye to the term soft skills. We're trying to get that out of our vernacular now. What do you think is the most underappreciated leadership skill? You named a few, but the most underappreciated?
So for me, the most underappreciated one is courage. Leadership is hard. It's extremely hard. You know, talking to a friend of mine who used to lead all Marine Corps training for the United States Marine Corps, he said the number one criterion for being a leader is you have to want to be one. And we have to remember that being a leader is like being a parent. You know, where for a lot of people who have a job, they do their job for the time they're at work. Well, when you're a parent, you know, there's no on-off hours. You know, you're a parent all the time. And you're not sure when something's going to happen. It can happen at opportune and inopportune times, and you have to react. Well, leadership is the same. You don't get to turn on or off when you're a leader. The minute you accept a position of leadership, that's now a 24/7 job. Leadership is actually very, very difficult. It also comes with the courage to stay the course. We talked about mission creep, to say, no, we're not going to pursue that shiny object. We're going to stay on this course. That takes courage, because remember, so many of the pressures put upon us, both external and from sometimes inside the company itself with our financial incentives, are putting pressure on us not always to do the right thing, or sometimes to do the expedient thing, or the financially effective thing, but that may do damage to the organization and to the people later on. But I'll benefit, you know, things like that. So the courage to do the right thing, the courage to have integrity, the courage to say, I'm struggling, I need help, the courage to set an example, the courage to build a trusting team, the courage to learn and teach human skills. I think people underappreciate just how difficult leadership is, and it's much more than simply accepting the promotion. You know, it's kind of like having a family. You know, having the child, that's the really fun, easy part, like getting the promotion. You know, that takes 2 or 3 minutes, right? But actually raising a child, that's a lifelong pursuit, kind of like leadership. And there's no one who's an expert in leadership. I've never met a great leader ever who considered themselves an expert in the subject. They all consider themselves students.
Well, it is one of those things that it's just a pursuit of mastery over many, many years of self-reflection and getting better. And it really absolutely is a journey. I liked your definition of courage. That's a nice way for us to reflect on what courage means. Next question someone submitted is, we've had some discussions about curiosity over the last couple of years, and sadly how for some people curiosity can diminish over time. How many questions we ask by the time we're 13 cuts in half from the amount of questions we asked when we were 5. And then I'm sure it just continues and continues. So how do we challenge ourselves, like you do, to stay curious and to overcome comfortable confirmation biases and complacency that can just sit in over time?
That's such a great question. And when it becomes even more insidious, we replace curiosity with judgment, which happens a lot. And so the question is, how do we replace our judgment with curiosity? So there's a simple technique. There are simple techniques to do this. One is write yourself a little reminder. Put a little sticky on your computer that says be curious or ask questions. You'll be amazed how well that works. But especially in times when we're judging, especially when we're in groups of leaders and we're in meetings, we can snowball into judgment really quickly. Let's say someone's performance is in decline. Immediately, they're lazy, they're stupid, they don't understand, they're a problem child. All it takes is one person to break that judgment and say, well, maybe they're going through something. And there is a technique where when you start to form a narrative about someone or about something, that you force yourself to come up with 21 possible alternatives of what could be going on in their life. So are they lazy? Absolutely. That's absolutely a possibility. Are they a problem child? Are they toxic? Absolutely. Are they going through, are their kids struggling at school? Maybe. Do they have problems in their family? Maybe someone's sick? Maybe. Do they have medical issues that they're hiding from us, that they're too embarrassed about? Maybe. Like, my point is can you go through the exercise of writing 20 or 21 alternative stories of what could be happening, and all of a sudden we find ourselves talking about and treating that person differently? And it doesn't just come about people, it's also about decisions we're making at work. And again, in a meeting, all it takes is one person to raise a question of what if. As leaders, the more we start asking each other and ourselves, what if, or what are the opportunities, or what are the possibilities, we'll find ourselves doing that with our people. That when they come to us, instead of us correcting them and telling them that they're wrong, raising questions. But believe it or not, simply having a little reminder to be curious is really important. The other thing is do things outside of your own work. People ask me what leadership books I've read recently, and the answer is none. I don't read leadership books. I like to read things and watch documentaries that are completely outside of the things that I work on. Why? Because yes, can I learn things in my own discipline? Of course I can. But to read a whole book that I'm either going to just completely agree with or completely disagree with, for one or two nuggets seems like a lot of effort for very little gain. But what I love is doing things outside of work, or sometimes even in work, that seem to have nothing to do with my work. Because what I've learned is that this whole idea of personal life and work life is nonsense. It's us. It's us. We're going through the same life. Sometimes, all that's different is the table we sit at and the clothes we wear. That's the only difference. The reason our colleagues love us is us. The reason our friends love us is us. And so I think bringing some of the curiosities we have outside of work to work and sharing them is actually promoting those kinds of things. It shows us as whole, well-rounded human beings, and it promotes us that we have interests outside of just our work as well.
And it makes us much more interesting to be with, even at work. And it helps us learn. Like, learning happens through experiencing different things that are not in your day-to-day. So I really love that as well.
I used to take my team. I remember. Oh, sorry.
No, keep going.
I was going to. Sorry, I remember. I called an essential meeting years ago. I called a mandatory meeting for my team, and they all showed up with their notebooks. And I said, "Okay, we're taking a little mini offsite," and I took them all to a museum. They thought they were showing up for a meeting, and we all went to a museum. And I just wanted them to look at things differently. I wanted them to talk. I wanted them to get to know each other. And so, fun things like that promote curiosity.
That's amazing. That sounds like best day ever. I'm sure they went home and said best day ever at work.
I hope so.
And I think one of the things you mentioned, like what if, or we try to say things like what if, or what else, or what could be wrong with that. So it's important to remember to keep those questions prompting us to shift our mindset. And I think as you executives tend to, and leaders, we're rewarded for solving problems. And the faster you solve problems, the better. But that's where the judgment kicks in quickly. So it's a bit of an overdevelopment of the judgment muscle for speed of answering problems versus the take your time and be curious. So we need to work on that right balance. So I appreciate that. So the next question that came in was diversity of thought. It's around diversity of thought and how to make sure that we have an environment that still allows some productive conflict. So when we have diversity of thought and we're inclusive of different opinions, which is very much important to us and to our workplace, friction happens, cognitive friction, and which builds curiosity and creativity, but it can also impact psychological safety. So can you talk a little bit about how we can have an environment that feels psychologically safe, but cognitive friction and conflicting views are okay and they're productive?
Well, I think, again, this goes back to those human skills that we don't teach. We don't teach difficult conversations. We don't teach conflict resolution. We don't teach de-escalation. And we don't teach how to give and receive feedback. We don't teach how to treat ideas. We don't even teach people how to have a meeting. Like, we don't teach any of these things. And so we're just leaving it up to chance to hope that somebody knows what they're doing, which we would never let somebody on the front line do. We give them tons of training on how to do their jobs. So part of it is the skill set that we can train. The other thing is a lot of leaders, I think, are afraid of doing things for fear of saying the wrong thing. And again, this really lends itself to the training we need to give our leaders. And especially, I think this was really exaggerated after the murder of George Floyd, where so many leaders did nothing. They're not bad people. They were just so afraid of saying the wrong thing or inflaming a situation or triggering someone that they chose to just do nothing. And so one of the things we need to do is teach people how to lean into tension, and to learn how to de-escalate one's own anger or one's own trigger. And again, you brought it up before, which is, and replace it with curiosity. Tell me more. What else? I'm struggling to understand. Let me tell you the story that's going through my head. I think is a really big one that I've learned, which is because I'm reacting based on my own narrative, right? And so they're reacting to my words or my reaction. And so one of the things that's really helped me is to share what's going on in my head so that people have the context of where my reaction's coming from. Let me tell you what my history is and what my background is. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just telling you my story. And I'll say, I had this happen in the past where X, Y, and Z. And so I'm nervous at your suggestion because in the past, this has happened. Can you help me resolve this, or do you understand where I'm coming from? And I think the more we can share what's going on in the process, rather than simply, responding with our answers or our reactions, helps the other person see the way we're trying to see it, and it also encourages us to see the way they're trying to see it. So I think the more we share, it's that vulnerability word again, right? Let me tell you my history. Let me tell you my baggage. Let me tell you my background. Let me tell you my experiences. Let me tell you where my opinion is coming from. The worst thing, the one that drives me up the wall, the one that triggers me is, this is how we've always done it. Well, why do we do it that way? Because this is how we've always done it. And my rule is, if you cannot tell me why we're doing it this way, that means it's on the chopping block. That doesn't mean it has to change, but I want real explanations of why we do something this way. If somebody can't tell me, then it's open to being changed.
That's a good default. So we're never going to say this is how we've always done it, for fear that our idea will be immediately ceased. I really like that. It's a good one. And it forces, again, the thoughtfulness. I love the lean in with tension, or lean into tension, and not always having to have your idea perfectly formed, especially in a difficult conversation before you start to enter the conversation and speak. So just letting people know how you're thinking or unpacking something and coming in safely can be super productive, versus coming in with all your thoughts perfectly formed and polished and with a bow wrapped on it. So I like that.
And I can give you something very practical if you like.
Yeah, please.
And it, which is, here's a technique to have a difficult conversation, which is, and this is what I did, and a lot of people I know did, again, after the murder of George Floyd, which is, I need to have a difficult conversation. I'm nervous to have this conversation. I'm afraid I'm going to get things wrong, and I'm afraid I might inflame something or trigger somebody, and I'm afraid of that. But I think it's more important for me to stumble through this conversation, because it's important for us to have, than for me to get it perfect. So I need you to just work with me, and if I say the wrong thing, please bring it up to me and work with me as we have this conversation together. Well, if you can have a difficult conversation about race, you can have a difficult conversation about anything. If you need to give somebody feedback, instead of just coming barreling in, to say, I need to have a difficult conversation with you. This is an uncomfortable thing for me. I'm afraid of hurting your feelings. I'm also afraid of saying the wrong thing, but I need to give you this feedback, or simply asking, can I give you some feedback? Sort of prepare someone, as opposed to, I'm going to give you some feedback. The weird thing is asking permission to do something difficult, to have a difficult conversation. It has a remarkable positive impact for the interaction you're going to have. It's so diffusing, the way you've put that. The tension immediately diffuses, because if we have empathy, we feel empathetic right away to your discomfort and want to also make you comfortable. So I think it's a great technique.
going to try some of these at home with my mom's visiting us. So we're going to see if it's not too late to teach
Works with
conflict
in-laws as well.
resolution to an in-law. That's what I was going to ask you. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Extra bonus advice for everybody today on managing in-laws. Okay, so someone had a question about something that you've quoted. So we're going to play back one of your quotes. We want to see if you feel differently about it now. So you've been quoted as saying, "Trust is not formed through a screen, it's formed across the table. It takes a handshake to bind humans, and no technology yet can replace that. There's no such thing as virtual trust." And what this individual wanted to know is, has your perspective changed given the reality of the pandemic, and we've had to do such a shift to virtual and hybrid work?
No, it remains the same. It is much more efficient to build trust in person. You don't have to do as many things. The famous violinist Isaac Stern said, "Music is what happens between the notes." Well, trust is what's built between the meetings. It's the conversation walking into the conference room. It's the conversation walking out of the conference room. It's saying hi in the hallway. It's grabbing a cup of coffee. It's knocking on the door and saying, "Do you have a minute?" All of these little, seemingly innocuous interactions over the course of time build camaraderie and build trust amongst a team. When we're virtual, all we have is the meeting. There is no before and after. There is no hallway talk. There is no stopping by. And so to attempt to build trust virtually actually requires more effort. This is one of the things that I think people don't recognize when they talk about the death of the office. They don't realize that if you want to do that, if you want to get rid of your office, it actually requires much more work to start to build some of the foundations of trust. So for example, you have to do things prescriptively. You can't just allow them to happen organically. So one of the things we do in our organization is we have a Monday morning huddle, where every Monday morning the whole team comes on, and we're not allowed to talk about work. You talk about what's on your heart and mind, and then we answer either a funny or poignant question that the huddle leader asks us, and at the end we end with a story that reminds us of why we do what we do, that anyone can present. Plus we can give public high five. So congratulations to somebody for helping us or going above and beyond. We do it publicly. But the point is there is no discussion of work or goals or work challenges. It's literally a personal conversation. We're learning about each other, and we get to hear somebody's happy, somebody's sad, somebody's struggling. But what we're doing is starting to build trust. We also recommend people use the telephone more often. Very often, even when we're on Zoom, because the cameras and the screens are not necessarily coordinated, you're looking them, dead in the eye on the screen, but what they see is this because you're looking at your camera. Or you find yourself looking at a dot, so that it appears like they're looking at you, but you're not looking at them. The point is it's weird. And so we like the telephone. People can be distracted more easily on Zoom than they can on the telephone. You can hear when somebody's distracted, and you can say, are you listening to me? When they're distracted on Zoom, for some reason we're uncomfortable saying anything, even though we can see they're checking their email. So I'm a great believer in picking up the phone and saying, how are you? My point is all of these things are still trying to promote personal interaction when we don't have it organically. You can build trust, but nothing replaces that in-person thing. Like people talk about the death of the business trip. Sure, it's dead until one person gets on a plane to make the deal and makes the new client feel special. Well, congratulations, business trips are back again.
That's interesting. We noticed a group of us came in today to the office. As I mentioned to you earlier, we're here in our office in Toronto, and I think instantly for a few of us that haven't seen each other in 18 months, it just incredible warmth and reconnection that you just can't completely create. Even though we're close, there is a different feeling. And what I like about your example is getting together on that Monday morning and just doing a huddle. How are you? How was your weekend? What's going on? What are you thinking about? It doesn't take away from your success or productivity. People could be thinking, oh my God, I don't have time for that. But you're successful, Simon, and you have a successful business, and no one can deny that. So this fallacy that if I have small talk or ask people how they're doing, or we have a 30-minute check-in on a Monday morning on our lives is unproductive is just not correct. So I love that you're a good example to share with us.
Thank you.
That's
like
right.
I said, we're doing it organically anyway. And online, we just have to do it prescriptively. So instead of 5 minutes,
Right.
5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, we're just doing it an hour all on Monday. Plus, we also encourage our people to set up work sessions where they turn on their screens, where they have a friend or colleague on the screen with them, and they're working. They're not working together. They're not working on the same project. It's just nice to have someone there while you're working. So again, it requires more effort.
Yeah, and get a dog. Okay, so we have a live question from Chris. So Chris Terrace is going to join us. And Chris, your question for Simon.
Thanks, Sandy and Simon. I'm loving the insight. It's super appreciated. I lead the strategy and animal health teams in our agriculture business unit, and I think this is a bit of a follow-on to your previous answer. The pandemic has changed the way we work and what's important to people in some ways. So in your mind, what are the biggest challenges organizations and leaders face in response to the changing needs and demands of our employees in the situation that we're in now?
It's such a great question. And I think it's so multi-layered and multifaceted. I think one of the things that the pandemic revealed, quite frankly, was the weakness of so many corporate cultures. I mean, we're seeing the great resignation happening. And if you read articles or listen to some of the talking heads, the prevailing thought is, well, they're getting, checks from the government, so they're not encouraged to come back to work. Or they're pursuing their dreams, which we've seen as well in our own company. Somebody wants to go be a screenwriter, and even though we have a great relationship and they love their job, they want to pursue their dreams. But the other thing that I think is underlying that it's missing, that these commentaries are missing, is that the cultures may have been weaker than we like to think they are. That the sense of belonging that people have when they would come to work is actually a lot more tenuous than we'd like to believe. So the bond that's allowing them to go off and do other things is easily broken. I think strong cultures, when there's a strong corporate culture, we recognize that I can pursue my dreams and work because I love it here and I know my team is supportive of me becoming a screenwriter or something, and I can do both. Or even though I'm making money, potentially even more money, there's so much more I get from my work. The camaraderie, the love, the support. I get all of this training on how to be a better listener and a better communicator, which is helping me in my marriage and helping me with my kids. And I don't want to lose that. Plus, I have close friends at work, and I can speak up and say, hey, I'm being offered more money from the government. Is there anything you can help? The point is it becomes a conversation rather than a resignation. So I think one of the things that we're missing is this might be a wake-up call for a lot of companies, that our cultures are just not as strong as we think they are. It's been spoken about for years that millennials, and now Gen Z are just not loyal to work. They bounce around from job year to year to year. Well, is that them or is that us? Maybe if we had stronger cultures, they wouldn't want to leave. Maybe if we offered them more than simply financial incentives for hitting certain numbers, that they'd want to stay. Maybe if they felt that they were growing as human beings, there would be things that were more appealing to them than simply a bigger paycheck somewhere else. So I actually think it's a big wake-up call, frankly, that we should go back and look at our cultures and say, are we as good as we think we are?
Thanks for your question, Chris. It brings us, we've been reflecting a lot about the opportunities. We've been thinking and talking about the Great Resignation. We've been talking about talent and cost of talent and scarcity of certain skills. But if we go back to the basics of assuming that compensation is fair and good and people feel well compensated for their work, the rest is up to us in terms of the environment that we create. And it's a lot in our hands and we think we've got a lot to offer in terms of an employee value proposition. And so it's a good opportunity to tighten that. I try to remind people that if there is a Great Resignation, we could be on the receiving end of that. Let's try to be the net gain, recipients of that. People may move, but let's take opportunities to strike and grab, disenfranchised team members that are leaving other organizations. So I have another question from a leader. So Hanif has dialed in and has a great question for you, Simon. Hanif, over to you.
Hi, Simon. I'm privileged to lead our international relationships, so I completely applaud getting business travel going again. So look forward to that. The question I have for you is, organizations have been experiencing a lot of labor shortages and emerging skill gaps. What advice do you have for us in terms of workforce planning and or our talent strategies?
Oh, give me a softball, why don't you? I don't think anyone's figured this one out. I think the hardest part is when there's a labor shortage, and the jobs that we used to easily fill that we're now struggling to fill. I think again, when it's an employee market, I think it sends a message to us that we took a lot of things for granted. People need jobs. We can pay them fairly. We don't have to pay them better than sort of middle. The kinds of things that we can offer them become secondary because we have all the cards, we have all the power, and so I think one of the things it forces us to do is to start looking at what people get from work. The nature of work has changed over the course of decades. Work wasn't the place that we had our sense of belonging. People, if you go back to the 50s or 60s, work was a place you made a living, and you had your sense of belonging and community from literally your community. People were much more active at church. We went to bowling leagues. We were members of Shriners clubs and volunteer groups. Like, we had strong senses of community and belonging outside of work. And over the course of the years, those things have sort of blended. We've seen less engagement in church. Bowling leagues have all but disappeared. And now people are demanding things that they never used to demand from work. Things like belonging, things like what am I being a part of, like that my personal purpose has to be intertwined with the organization. And so I think companies can start to really look at themselves and say, do we actually have a purpose that goes beyond our financial results? Do we actually have a purpose that people can feel a part of? Do we have metrics that help people see that we're making progress in things other than what we're offering a shareholder or what the bottom line is producing? Are our incentive structures promoting things like teamwork? Is our training going to give you skills like how to communicate and how to listen that will benefit you, of course, at work, but you'll have a better relationship with your spouse and your kids because of what you're learning from your work? And when we're sitting down and talking to people and interviewing and advertising our jobs, are we saying, come work for this great job, lots of opportunity, upward mobility, get a great salary? Or are we saying, we want to make you a better version of yourself? And start looking at some of alternative things that people used to get outside of work that they want from work now. That are we actually building that into our work-life culture? And I say work-life culture as if they are one thing. So I think we can actually. It starts quite frankly by listening, which is call the people who have left and say, can you tell me not why you left? Can you tell me what you're leaving for? What are you pursuing? And then everything they say, don't have an answer. Don't say, well, we already do that. Don't try and fix something. Just say, go on, tell me more. I don't understand. Go on, tell me more. And really get a full picture of what's going on in people's lives and what their ambitions and dreams are. Because I would bet money that that a lot of the things that people feel like they're lacking, that they're looking for, that they're searching for, probably at least some of it, we could help them find at work. But the problem is we don't promote those things, even in our recruitment ads. Why don't we start talking about our vision, our mission, and how we help people grow before we talk about upward mobility, salary, and where you want to work? So I think we can start looking at some asymmetrical things that we didn't used to look at, quite frankly. They've always been there. We just didn't need to look at them.
Well, we have been talking quite a bit about the power of our social purpose and being a social purpose-driven company, and how much more that just even seems to resonate with, as you mentioned earlier, Gen Y and now Gen Z, Gen C, and we just have to be better at leaders. We just have to be better at leaders about talking about those things, because I think we've underestimated at times that people want those things. We get right to the technical things about what training they might get, what benefits they might get, what their comp looks like, what their bonus program looks like, which is all important, but it seems to be that it's just table stakes. Those things have to be good and fair. But we've got to really leverage our social purpose, our culture, our values, the opportunities to work in a team that we have as much more important than we have in the past. So we're going to build that into our recruitment. We already have.
I can give you a funny example at the risk of distracting, only because I keep having thoughts. I can give you a funny example. Feel free to interrupt me if I go down a rabbit hole. so true story
Probably
of a
not.
bunch of military recruiters who show up at a high school, and the Air Force recruiter stands up with a beautiful PowerPoint and shows what you can get from the Air Force, which sounds very similar to what a corporate recruiter might do. Here are all the things you can get from us. The Navy recruiter stands up and says, forget what the Air Force said. Let me tell you why the Navy's better. And again, here are the things that you can expect to get. The Army recruiter does the same thing. Beautiful PowerPoint shows the kind of life you're going to live. Finally, the Marine recruiter stands up with no PowerPoint, stands on the edge of the stage, looks around the room, sort of takes the room in and says, nope, I don't want any of you. He says, you have to understand the Marine Corps is the single most difficult thing you'll ever do in your life, emotionally and physically, and I don't think there's anyone in this room strong enough to be in my Marine Corps. He says, if you think I'm wrong, I'm standing at the back of the room. And the point is, he puts a stake in the ground of what the culture is like. And he's recruiting to the culture, not to the benefits or the trappings or the perks. And for us to have a clear sense of what our culture is like and recruit to people who are going to be additive to our culture, which I think is more important than belonging to our culture. This idea of you're a bad cultural fit, you're a good cultural fit. We want people who are going to contribute and help us build upon our culture. Cultures are living, breathing animals, and giving people an opportunity to contribute rather than simply fit in, I think is something very exciting for a lot of people, especially young people. We want to know that our effort and our energy contributes to more than simply helping making us or a company money.
Well, I love the contribute to the culture versus fit to the culture, because when you talk about diversity and inclusiveness, if at the end of the day you're still looking for people to fit your culture perfectly, that's a bit oxymoronic, right? We actually want you to contribute to making our culture better and better and better versus just fit
Right.
into us, which is a
Correct.
little static. So that's a nice way to think about it.
Correct.
Okay, I want to come back to your book, The Infinite Game, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. We unpacked in a couple of roundtables back in 2019, so lots of conversations about it. So someone who was really paying attention wants to double click on existential flexibility. And you talked about that quite a bit in that book. And so that's the ability to make a 180-degree shift in your business when it's required. And you talk a little bit about Kodak as a company that had a finite mindset and paid a significant price, which we all know of. So what are the signs in an organization that a shift might be required, and how can leaders determine when to make it?
So that's such a great question. So it goes back to that vision again, right? Which is, if we don't know the direction we're going in, then we won't know when we have to change path, because we're too busy counting that we're going really fast and things are going really well. And on paper, Kodak things were great, except if you could see the long term, you could see that they were going to go off the path, at some point. One of the bigger challenges, I think, is all of the people who made those decisions had long retired and moved on after Kodak finally went bankrupt. So I think vision is the big one to know, because there's changes in culture, there's changes in technology, there's changes in politics, there's changes in people's tastes that have to allow us to evolve and change in how we're advancing our cause. And very, very often companies become stuck in the technology that they've invested in. They become stuck in the money they've already spent or the hours they've already spent investing in one strategic direction, even though everybody kind of knows it's wrong, but we just don't have the courage to walk away from it. And there's that word again, courage, to cut our losses and say, I think this is the wrong thing to do. I think we need to change directions. I think Sandy's not hearing me. I can wave.
So 1 second, Simon.
All good.
Oh,
There we go. Test, test, test. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, not in my ear, but I can hear you anyways now. So we're good.
Great. Okay.
Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine. Yeah. So the whole idea,
Perfect.
was how to make an existential flex. How well, very often you go. I mean, it's actually the sum total of a lot of things we've been talking about. Courage is definitely one of them. Walking away from existing investment. even though we know it's eventually going to fall off a cliff where somewhere else is better. But we've already spent all this money. We can't just walk away from it. Well, you can. The other thing we talked about was curiosity, which is we have to be curious about what's changing in the world, technology and otherwise, tastes, lifestyles, and not just reacting to them. Are these things permanent? I think a lot of people are making shifts during COVID that are reactions, predicting as to what the world's going to be like really when it's not the case. I think the other one is worthy rivalry, quite frankly, which is the other concept in the book, which is instead of reacting to competition, I think studying competition and seeing how they're doing, especially startups. Startups very often, small companies, they're run generally by younger people. They're generally seeing things that older companies and older people are missing. And it doesn't mean we have to buy them. It doesn't mean we have to like them. It doesn't mean we have to agree with them. But I think we should probably pay attention to them, because it was the movie and television industry that ignored Netflix, and it was the publishing industry that ignored Amazon. And MySpace had no idea that Facebook was even a thing. And the problem is they were all comparing themselves to the large incumbents. In other words, it's old, stodgy companies comparing themselves to old stodgy companies, thinking that will make them help them be reactive. And the reality is, pay attention to small companies. Go be a part of those. Even have a little fun to invest just for fun. It's not a significant thing as part of a business plan, but it's just helping you keep your fingers on the pulse and gets you in the circuit, visiting all the various Silicon Valleys that that have propped up all across the world and around different areas of both our countries. I think that's really, really important. Understanding what the trends are, not reacting to them, learning and studying them, and seeing what is actually sticky.
I think the studying is really important. We try really hard not to focus just on the traditional telco competitors. We have to watch them, of course, because we're compared to them in our industry, but they're not our obsession. We try to look around the corner and understanding what other technology disruptors are going to come into our space and what other disruption can we do with our technology. But it's an important reminder not to have the arrogance that you're just comparing all the time and contrasting at every detail, but what can we study? So I like the word study versus be threatened by or just arrogant. What can we learn?
And your use of disruption is important, because any kind of disruption or strategic shift does come at a cost. It does increase stress on the organization in the short term. It does cost money. It probably will have some short-term financial implications. And a lot of executives are very afraid of those declines. The example that I wrote about in the book, CVS choosing to stop selling cigarettes in all of its stores, for example, came at a short-term financial cost. It was the right strategic shift. Not exactly an existential flex, but a very difficult strategic decision nonetheless. Any kind of, I talked to a CFO once and I said, what are your priorities? And this is for a large company. And he said, my priorities are innovation and efficiency. And I smiled and said, well, good luck with that, because innovation is not efficient. I guess sometimes it can be, but the very nature of innovation means experimentation, and then experimentation necessarily means failure and wastage. And by wastage, I mean we're learning lessons. I don't like the term failure because you should be learning from it. But the point is you can't have innovation and efficiency at the same time. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, we try really hard to also be mindful about that notion of experimentation. Try, experiment, start small. If it works, scale it. If it doesn't work, let it go and keep moving. And even large companies can do that. So it's an important muscle to have. We actually talked about your CVS example in our roundtables because it was a good example of doing things that everybody thought was just bound to fail. The competitors aren't doing it. They're going to take your market share. The board thought they were crazy, and it ended up opening up all these other partners. Not only were they successful, they gained market share, they went into other opportunities, they had new partners and moved and aligned themselves with their vision, which was a little bit more healthier than the whole tobacco piece.
Correct.
Although it was a big part of their financial success, contributed to them, and they're still doing, very well. So we have a question
and vision
from
was at
Dave.
the front of it. Vision was at the front of it.
The vision
yes,
was
Dave.
at the front to get through all the courageous and difficult things they had to do. Dave is up next, and he has a question for you, Simon.
Hi, Simon.
Hey, Dave.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm proud to lead the business customer experience team, and we're focused on delivering technology solutions for businesses all across Canada. And speaking of what we can learn from our competitors, I wanted to ask if you've started to see evidence of publicly traded companies that are being rewarded for advancing a social purpose while caring about their people and while also driving shareholder return. That seems like the trifecta of things that we really want to do at TELUS. Can you share any examples?
Yeah, they're being rewarded by employees. They're being rewarded by customers. I think that Wall Street still is not a huge fan, mainly because the incentive structures of the analyst community are not based on your company advancing its social purpose, but rather your company hitting their predictions. I'll tell you one company that I think has done a good job, but they've had to have the courage to speak their mind and stand up to Wall Street. WD-40, as in WD-40, the lubricant company. So it's not a glamorous product. Was on one of their financial calls one day, and the analyst said, "You've missed your numbers." And the CEO, Gary Ridge, said, "No, I missed your numbers. My numbers are fine." And I think that's part of it, which is recognizing that the pressures that we face from the public markets don't encourage us to make the decisions that are sometimes good for our company and good for advancing our social purpose. But I think it's important to point out the example, as we just did, about CVS, which is Wall Street absolutely punished them, berated them, criticized the decision, punished them with their buy-sell recommendations, and yet they were rewarded heavily by employees, the love that they got, the loyalty that grew, and from customers. You know, the average sale at a CVS store went up. Not to mention the fact that they made people healthier. So I think the question is, where do you want your reward from? Over the course of time, if your employees and customers are rewarding you over the course of time, then the shareholder will benefit. That's the great irony. So I actually think the ones that are having a good time of it are the ones that are starting to figure out ways how to brush up against Wall Street's pressures. There's one company I know. It's a very large. It's a large airline. So many tens of thousands of employees, if not more. They've done something very sophisticated where they've bifurcated their shareholder base. So they looked at their shareholders who are the long-term investors, the ones who believe in the management team, the ones who believe in the vision, the ones who, when they talk about having a social mission, they agree with it. When things go badly, they don't just dump the stock, they stick with them because they believe in the leadership and the vision. And the ones who are just the fair-weathered fans, the one who put pressure on them to make short-term numbers, they've literally gone through the whole list and bifurcated the groups. So when they say we're shareholder driven, they are, but only one side of the page, and they literally work to ignore this group. And so I think that what you want to do is find the shareholders who do believe in you, and they will be rewarded. The irony is the short-term ones will get rewarded anyway because they're fair-weathered fans. Younger companies, I think, some of the younger public companies, Airbnb, for example, very, very strong social mission. They're in the news right now for providing free housing for Afghan refugees in the United States. And no, not just in the United States, around the world. 40,000 they're going to host for free. They're going to pick it up there. So I think that some of the younger companies, which we should probably pay attention to, they're doing it. And I think Wall Street treats them a little differently because they're young.
It's interesting, you know, we, as you say, that we have shareholders that are not only accepting, but they're pushing us to be responsible from a social purpose perspective. They're pushing us to be environmentally responsible and to have a sustainability strategy. They're pushing us to have diversity goals and want to see diversity and inclusion and diversity goals, quite frankly, at our board level, at our management level. So we have seen a rise in social activism in the shareholder community, and that's exciting because, as you said, if the more shareholders that we have that have those shared set of values with us, the more tolerant they'll be of any changes we make in direction, and they'll want to stick with us for deeper, purposeful reasons than, you know, what you would call finite gains. in their investments. So we can't ignore the other ones, but I think it's a nice, if the IR team is listening to me and the finance guys right now, they work very hard on this message because they're pushed for these messages, and this just it's good to hear that we can just continue to build up that excitement from our shareholder community and get that people that want to be with us for the infinite game. So that's exciting.
And the opportunity is to lead, right? I think, as you pointed out, a lot of companies are responding. In other words, they're doing it not because they necessarily believe in it, or maybe they believe in it now, but they're responding to pressure, right? Being purpose-driven, putting the environment first. They hadn't thought about it until the pressure began. And that pressure very often came from customers and employees first, and then eventually trickled out into the investor community. So I think the opportunity to be a leader is to be a company that's willing to make a decision first that others will follow. You're a leader when others follow you. It doesn't mean you're the best or the brightest, but it means you set the trend. So I agree with you. I think a lot of companies are going this way, but the ones that I'm paying attention to, which were the ones that are reactive, and then there's two kinds of reactive. Reactive because we have to, but we don't really believe in it. And reactive because, you know what, we really should, and we actually do believe in it. Yeah.
That's exciting. That's very exciting for us. So let me come to the question that we're all thinking about, and then there's one more question from one of our team members. Can you share what you're working on? We haven't been able to get this out of your team, so can you share what you're working on? What's occupying your brain as you're thinking about the world? What can we expect coming? We're going to plan our next leadership roundtable, so we want to know what's the next bit of exciting things coming. Or you don't want to tell us?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm now trying to tackle some very, very difficult problems. I'm working behind the scenes on some really, really hard problems where I can really roll my sleeves up. I've been out there preaching a message for so long, and I'm very lucky that I'm very grateful that amongst my I've lost it. Okay, I'm back again. Because of my books and my talks, my message can spread without me being on stage the whole time. And so now I'm spending considerable more time working behind the scenes again, which is sort of my happy place. One of the things I'm working on is police reform. We formed a group called The Curve, which is the most forward-thinking progressive police chiefs and sheriffs in the country, who we're finding ways that we can change the culture of policing in the United States for the better. It's been remarkable, and I'm learning a ton and meeting some really great people. So that's one of the things I'm working on. In terms of sort of more booky kind of things, I've become very interested in the concept of control, especially during COVID and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. And what we saw happen on January 6th in the United States. When people feel in control and when people feel out of control, how does that affect how we view each other and how we view ourselves? And how do companies or even our governments, what are they doing that make us feel in control? And what I've seen is people who feel out of control, feel a lack of control of their own lives or their own destinies, it actually promotes things like conspiracy theory. Also inside companies, when we feel out of control, it actually promotes things like office politics. It's a fascinating thing inside a company. When we give people agency, just more opportunity to decide what they want to do and how to do their jobs, or they're being told how you should do your job and this is the only way to do it. It actually not only increases stress, but it actually increases office politics and people exerting control over people because they try to have control at any sort of thing. So there are no fully formed ideas yet, but I'm really fascinated by this idea of feeling in control.
They sound very good. We absolutely can all, I think, relate to this concept of losing control, as we all have in the last 18 months, of things that we just assume to be natural and normal. So we'll be excited to see some of your work on that, and certainly on the police reform. What an important topic. So that'll be exciting. I'm sure you're going to have a big impact. We'll be watching. So Lisa has the closing question for the day, and I think it's just a really nice summary of how we see you, Simon. And so Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us home with a really great question.
I
feel privileged, Sandy, that I get the last word. I'm excited. Simon, thanks so much for sharing your time with us. You've just given us so much to think about today. I support our contact center agents around the globe that are working day in and day out to give our customers an amazing experience. Here's my question for you. I think you describe yourself as an unshakable optimist. What keeps you so optimistic?
So there's two things. One goes back to that sense of vision and purpose, which is the metaphor is it's a light at the end of the tunnel. The vision that I have, I imagine a world. So there's that word that lives in my imagination. I imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and end the day fulfilled by the work that they do. That is my light at the end of the tunnel. Optimism is not naive. It's not blind positivity. I can say I'm in a dark tunnel. We're in a dark tunnel. I don't know how long we're going to be in this tunnel. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be stressful. But I know that if we stick together and work together, we will get to that light at the end of the tunnel, and we will come out stronger than when we went in. So one of the things is absolute fixation on the future I'm working to build. That definitely helps. And the other one is the strength of relationships. These are nice bookends. Where we started this conversation, calling my friend the active duty military friend about the need to reach out to for help. And I think the strength of our relationships, when we have people in our lives who say, I believe in you, I've got your back, even if this thing goes south, I'll still be there with you. Those are the things that give courage. Those are the things that breed optimism. I, for one, do not believe that courage or even optimism are just internal things. You dig down deep and find the courage. I just don't think that's how it works. Courage is external. The reason we have the courage to jump out of an airplane is because of the parachute on our back. It's the external thing. The Navy SEALs are seen as one of the highest performing organizations on the planet. And a former SEAL was asked, what kind of person makes it into the SEALs? And he said, I can't tell you what kind of person makes it in, but I can tell you what kind of person doesn't make it in. He said, the star college athlete that's never really been tested to the core of their being, none of them make it in. He said, the preening leader who likes to delegate everything, none of them make it in. He said, the guys that show up with hulking muscles, covered in tattoos to show how strong they are, how tough they are, none of them make it in. He said, some of the guys who make it in are skinny and scrawny. He said, some of the guys you'll see shivering out of fear. He said, but one thing they all have in common, when they're emotionally exhausted, when they're physically exhausted, when they have nothing left to give, somehow, some way, they're able to dig down deep inside themselves and find the energy to help the person next to them. It's about service. And so the more opportunities I have to serve others, and the more people I have surrounded me who believe in me and who are there to look after me and protect me when I'm at my lowest, it's actually quite easy to stay optimistic about a bright future.
Wow, that's great. And thank you for the question, Lisa. And Lisa, you should know, is an optimist. So it was a great way to end this. Giving where you live, giving back to the community, doing service for others is a great way, as we all know and feel every day, to stay optimistic and to feel positive and hopeful, and certainly re-energizing. So thank you for that inspiration, Simon. We're at the end of our time, and we've been able to touch base on quite a number of topics, including certainly what it means to lead during these challenging times, and into the future, some things to expect, some workforce trends, some risks, and certainly, most of all, some opportunities. Simon, thanks for sharing your really valuable insights and perspective. And as a gesture of our gratitude, TELUS is pleased to make a $1,000 donation to Rambert in your name.
Thank you.
And for those who are not familiar with Rambert, it's based on the South Bank in London, and it's actually one of the world's most diverse company of dancers. They transform everyday spaces by making dance that's inspiring, adventurous, dynamic, and relevant, and offer performances, dance, and wellness classes, courses for people of all ages and all abilities. So again, Simon, thank you for your team and to you for making this event possible.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. It's been a real joy. Thanks so much for having me.